is the Big Ten more top heavy or balanced compared to previous seasons with the new scheduling arrangement?
They are still top heavy. Let's not get this wrong, but they're not as top heavy as previous years. In previous years, it was Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, and a cloud of dust. But really, this year you can add Oregon to that mix, and on the outside, USC, Nebraska, Rutgers, and Iowa aren't that far behind. Previous years it was just Iowa. Now you can legitimately say Nebraska, like we just talked about, Rutgers, like we've talked about on this channel previously, not today, but and USC. I think that these teams are right there ish, and then going forward, I think Michigan State will enter the conversation, not just this year. Um, so I think that they still are top heavy. Let's not pretend like they're the SEC. The SEC is the bigger conference. There, you have it. But they are a little bit more evened out, in my opinion. More top heavy, I would say the Big Ten is more top heavy just because of the fact that um, there is a little bit more of a drop off than in the SEC. In the SEC, you have legitimate teams and a lot of them. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, I can get behind that. The Big Ten, I think, right now is certainly deeper than it was last year, 2022, 21, certainly deeper than 20. In 20, it was Ohio State and everyone else, not even close. A 2019, this Big Ten is deeper in terms of competition, for sure, than any Big Ten season I can really think of off the top of my head. I think last year's Ohio State and Michigan will probably be like better or even significantly better than the top two teams this year in the Big Ten, like on an average basis. Ohio State this year probably has the same chance of improving as staying the same or becoming worse compared to last year's team, but Michigan will certainly get worse. And I think 2023 Michigan will be better than any Big Ten team will be this year. But again, that's to be seen. In terms of competition and parity, the Big Ten is certainly deeper. However, I think in a certain sense, just a certain sense, there is a good case for you to say that it's more top heavy. Oregon comes in to compete for the Big Ten, but that's really the only expansion team that is going to compete for championships from what we can tell. The other three, USC, and especially UCLA and Washington could be with either of those two California schools, are closer to the category of being has-beens or being extra pulp in the juice, if you get what I'm saying, where they simply add to the resumes of Oregon, Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State. The teams who won the scheduling system are Penn State because they don't have any rivals, which means they don't have any permanent opponent, which means Penn State some years may not play any of the top three or even four teams. They could get a schedule like what Rutgers has this year, where Rutgers plays none of the top four teams by preseason odds to win the conference. And Michigan State, Rutgers, Maryland, and Indiana also benefit from the divisionless arrangement because they no longer have to play Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State every season. But of those teams, only Penn State and the Spartans, I think, have the potential to be consistent conference contenders. So in terms of conference contenders, I don't necessarily know if... I don't know. I'd lean toward it still being deeper in terms of, like, actual depth or the potential for variety or parity. I mean, I might be rambling at this point. I guess what I'm saying is some teams do have it worse off after this arrangement. Like all the Big Ten West teams, I think that it got harder for all of the Pac-12 teams. So that right there is 11 of the current 18 Big Ten teams that got worse for. and then Michigan and Ohio State. I'd say it got harder for them because they were the big two by a mile, and now Oregon will compete with them for sure.
Yeah, I largely agree with you here. I think that we're both really in the same mind when it comes to this question.
Yeah, yeah. Penn State. I just want to keep on this because I can't even believe it. No Ohio State, no Maryland, no Michigan State, no Minnesota, no Michigan. There's no permanent rival that Penn State has in
It's
conference.
weird, isn't it?
Yeah,
Like really weird.
yeah.
Um
I mean, seriously, think about it. Let me input Rutgers conference schedule into Penn State's. So if Penn State had Rutgers Big Ten schedule, Penn State would play at West Virginia, Bowling Green, and Kent State non-conference. Then they would play Washington at Nebraska, Wisconsin, UCLA at USC, Minnesota at Maryland, Illinois, and at Michigan State. Again, that's taking Rutgers Big Ten conference schedule and transposing it on what Penn State's Big Ten conference schedule is. Well, there's no Ohio State, no Michigan, no Oregon. That Penn State team goes 12-0, and you still may not know how, like, if they're elite or just great because, like, how weak that schedule is. I mean, it's insane. They won, and I nearly forgot this when drawing up the show sheet. They won the Big Ten scheduling because now they don't have to play anyone on a yearly basis. They don't.
it's so true.
Yeah. And then Michigan State's schedule, really, they still play Michigan and Ohio State, and then you just switch out Penn State for Oregon. So in my mind, at least this year, their schedule is tougher. But at least in the non-con, there's no. I mean, Boston College is not like last year's Washington.
Right.
It'd be funny if they were, but I don't think Bill O'Brien's going to do that there in Boston. But yeah, and then Rutgers' schedule, theirs is easy. Maryland's is fairly tough, but not as tough as it was last year. And the same goes for Indiana. I mean, it's only Michigan State, Ohio State, and Michigan whose schedules are tougher this year than last year's, just looking at the Big Ten East teams. But yeah, I just really wanted to get in on that because that's part of the reason why I think Penn State's almost a lock for the playoff this year is James Franklin typically only loses big games. There are some exceptions to that, like the COVID year or 21 or 2018. Like there are some years where he does also choke against the medium or even bad teams. But if he just does what he normally does, and this team has a lot of talent, they've recruited more like a Big Ten school as well over the past 3-4 seasons, which I think helps raise their floor and their chances at winning the Big Ten. Their only big game's Ohio State, and that's at home. That could be a whiteout given any potential scheduling arrangement, but who knows? And they could have better trench play than Ohio State because of how they've recruited at the O-line, and the fact that they return a lot on D-line as well, just like Ohio State. So they have like a really good shot. I think Penn State does, even though you and I, of course, don't view them as this elite team or even the best team in the Big Ten. They have a good shot of going to Indy, not just this year, but probably every season on an average basis.
Yeah, I mean, the way they're set up, I mean, whatever Penn State did to get that, they should really be commended for that. Let's be honest here. Whatever that athletic director did really was kind of a miracle. They did. You hit on all the points there. Penn State's going to be around. And it's not like James Franklin loses to the mediocre to lower teams very often, if not at all. They have this. They're always slated as the 10-win team, the 9-win team. So they're going to be there, and especially in this college football playoff era where you have 12 teams and then possibly 16 teams in the coming years, they're going to be a lock every single year. They're going to be right there. And it's just hard to say that they're not going to be there. Anyway.
Yeah. And then for Michigan State, I think that Jonathan Smith is a top 10 head coach. I think his staff is top 10, top 5. In fact, I have Jonathan Smith as my 5th highest ranked coach nationally. I know that Michigan fans will find that to be insane. I myself, as a Michigan fan, would have found it insane 2 years ago, but he's done a great job at Oregon State. I have no reason to believe that he won't succeed at Michigan State, where he has infinitely more resources and has hired a great staff. And they won the scheduling arrangement too, because their only permanent rival is Michigan. Now, of course, with the deeper Big Ten, it's not like they'll ever have an easy schedule, at least most of the time. But at times they could win the lottery. And also, given how high I am on Jonathan Smith, I don't think they'll need to win the lottery. I think there will be some years where they can win several games or maybe even dominate a tough schedule. In, of course, I'd say the medium range future. Like not next year or this year, certainly, but probably like the next 5 years or so. 4.
And this is where we go back to strength and conditioning and player development, because Michigan State, they have all the tools to be elite in those categories. I think that they look a lot like where Nebraska is, just a year behind. They have a legitimate head coach. They have a legitimate staff. And what Michigan State has this year that Nebraska doesn't is a quarterback. When you have a quarterback, you have a chance. So I don't think that they're going to be bad this year. I think Aiden Childs is a pretty darn good quarterback. But for this year, it's going to be hard to predict them, just record-wise. Yeah. But just going forward past this season, I think that you can look on Michigan State with a lot of optimism, like how you look at Nebraska with a lot of optimism, in my opinion. I like Michigan State going forward. I would buy into their stock right now if they had stock. But anyway.
Yeah, I would do the exact same thing. I would certainly, and I'm looking at you, the viewer too, buy stock into Michigan State and Jonathan Smith. And if you haven't already for Nebraska, you can do that. But I'd say buy even more in Michigan State because they're even lower than Nebraska now. And I think Smith and the staff that he has is better than what Nebraska has right now. But that's just my opinion, and they have a longer way to go than Nebraska in terms of a rebuild. Thank you all so much for watching this clip of Touchdown Talk. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and comment your reaction down below. That way College Football with Sam can continue to grow and you can get the best experience out of college football content on YouTube. I would like to give a shout out to my Patreon members for sponsoring this channel and video. Thanks to Crash2488 and Braska Rascal for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane and Connor Little OH for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for being all-conference members. Have a great day, everyone, and we will see you back soon. Bye-bye.